crazy.
What?
We are crazy for drilling holes in the boat. And when you look closely, you can actually, just like on a tree, you can count the rings and determine how old your sailboat is.
Oh my gosh. Hello, Aladino.
Hello.
What you doing?
What does it look like?
You're moving a large piece of plywood.
It's the aft deck.
It's the aft deck?
Yeah. Welcome back. I'm Aladino, and together with my wife Maya, we are refitting a Cape George Cutter 36. Rebuilding the cockpit has been a really big priority, and it has taken shape over the last few episodes. From a jagged, gaping hole to what is now resembling a cockpit. So maybe before I put it in place, a little explanation. I would like you, Maya, to stand on the piece of plywood so that it conforms to the deck, and I'm actually going to go from one locker to the next and trace the beams and the overhead onto this, so that I can actually sand the areas where we're gonna bond it to.
All right.
And where to make the cutouts for the hatches.
Okay.
But I gotta do that from inside.
That's gonna be so claustrophobic.
It always is. Oh.
I don't know, yeah. Oh my god, Aladino.
Alright.
Turn your light on.
A propane bottle. Pro tip, don't become a boat builder if you're claustrophobic.
It felt very strange to lock poor Aladino in the cockpit locker by standing on it, but he asked for it, so I'm just helping him out.
Okay.
Okay.
Right there. And you go on to the very port corner. Front port. Try to rotate.
Are you okay?
Wow. Okay.
All right. Okay, my turtle?
Ah, yes. Wow, I even marked this one. Wow. I guess I forgot this one. I forgot one. I'm gonna go down again.
One?
Yes. Wow, luxury.
Okay.
Now we do the engine compartment. Beautiful. Now we've got it all marked. I'm ready to take this down onto the table, and I'll just drill out holes in regular intervals.
Days are speeding by, there ain't no time to cry about giving up on things I really need, like laying on your chest, no distractions, moving with nowhere to go.
Just to simply list how this is all constructed, first of all you got the beams, the one layer of plywood sits on that, then there is a second layer of plywood, also 1/2 inch, which is staggered at the seams though, and then that is all glassed over for waterproofing it and chafe resistance, and then there is the fairing and primer and paint. Putting down the first layer of deck is a really big deal. There is of course another one missing over top of it, but once one is done, it's already a solid deck, and it's the one that takes the most labor. The first one goes over beams, so there's a lot of tape, there's a lot of cleanup, and the next layer instead will be more straightforward. So yeah, it's a big step.
Meanwhile, I kept working on all the various tasks that I am undertaking in the interior. It is a bit of a delicate balance because, you know, you're waiting for one coat to dry and maybe another coat on a different piece needs to be sanded, but you can't start sanding until the other coat is somewhat dry because you don't want to get all that dust stuck in your nice layer of varnish. So you really gotta plan the day. It actually helps to have a lot of different pieces on the go at once because it means that while something's drying or something is, waiting for something else, then you've already got another thing that you can continue on. So I find my days are really packed to the brim, just one thing after the other. I am still working on building up a few layers of high performance epoxy as a primer on the chart table before moving on to the tabletop epoxy, the UV varnish, and the satin finish varnish. I've mentioned all of that in previous episodes, so I won't go into detail, but yeah, lots of layers planned for the chart table.
Now that the first layer of plywood is done, I'm moving right away to the second layer. The second layer was pretty simple and quick to actually cut out because I placed the first layer on top of some plywood sheets and I traced them out, and then it was just a matter of having two pieces of the first layer and because I'm staggering them, and then I just had to make the cut line in the middle of two of the first layers, if that makes sense.
Hello.
Hello.
What's up?
So I am almost ready to glue the deck on, but then this middle compartment is going to turn very dark, so it is time to move on to something exciting. I want to drill some holes into the boat. Oh. Which, yeah, people get stressed about, but it's all good. If you know how to patch up holes, it's no big deal. So in this is going to be the propane locker, so propane has to be vented overboard, of course, at the lowest spot in the compartment. So that's the hole I'm going to drill first, and it's going to help me then determine the others, which are the cockpit drains. They're going to go here, and I want to place them above the waterline. Try that, because the cockpit is higher. And then we are also going to have the exhaust. And eventually we're going to have a manual and an electric bilge pump, but we don't have those yet, so that's going to be boat yoga for in the future. Apply some tape, and that is just to make a little neater cut. I guess I could also drill from the other side, but I'm gonna just do that instead. An insane amount. How many 16ths? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
13 16ths?
Yeah.
Well, and the thickness does change. So
it does.
Down at the bottom of the hull, it is closer to 1 1/4 because we've drilled out there as well.
Totally.
But nearer the top and I guess the transom, it's a little less,
Yeah.
but I mean, still pretty insane.
Totally. Well, you can see here it tapers up from like 1 1/4 to actually 1/2 inch
Yeah.
at the very top.
Yeah.
And when you look closely, you can actually, just like on a tree, you can count the rings and determine how old your sailboat is.
Oh my gosh.
So now that I have one drilled, I'm gonna think about it a little bit, take reference, measure.
So meanwhile, while Aladino is working in the cockpit, I am returning to all of my finishing projects. The chart table has actually seen a bit of a setback and things are not going so well. So yesterday I thought I was actually going to be ready to apply a layer of like the tabletop epoxy, but then I accidentally sanded through to the bare wood, so I thought, okay, we'll do one last layer, that's the third one, of the regular high performance epoxy just to seal that bare wood. And that's hopefully to prevent any sort of like bubbles or anything from the wood rising up into the layer of thicker tabletop epoxy that I'm going to apply. So I put on the third coat, but somehow some form of contamination got on there because there's several sections where the epoxy just sort of separated out. So I really put a lot of love and effort, and I have a lot of excitement invested into this chart table, and it was really, really disappointing to see the contamination. I don't know where it came from, and I just hope I can get rid of it. So I think I'll begin by degreasing it with acetone before I even do anything else to hopefully rid it of any contamination. I also threw away the gloves that I was using yesterday when I did this. I really have no idea what the contamination is or where it came from. Aladino and I were trying to discuss it, but we couldn't think of anything. We haven't actually come into this problem with all of the finishing work that we've done on the boat so far. So fingers crossed that this is the first and last time that this happens, because it is very frustrating. I know Aladino has experience dealing with contamination. At one of his jobs in Switzerland, when I was living at the boatyard with him when we first met, he was working on a client's boat. The job was to paint the transom. And he painted the transom and there were these big silicone fish eyes in the paint. Basically, if you have one tiny little dust speck of silicone, the paint won't adhere and it'll sort of like pull away in this circular pattern, making a fisheye. It's unusable and you certainly can't deliver it to a client. So Aladino's boss was trying to figure out where this contamination was coming from. You know, Aladino had degreased the surface very properly, had used anti-silicone remover. This is just standard practice when Aladino paints anything. So they really couldn't figure out where it was coming from. So his boss was like, okay, well, we just have to do it again. Make sure you really degrease the surface this time and everything. Same thing happened again. How many times did you end up doing it?
I don't want to say it.
Yeah.
Like 5 or 6.
5 or 6 times of painting this transom. It was terrible. I mean, your boss was really stressed. Neither of you could figure out where it was coming from. Yeah. And I think after a while, the realization came that this boatyard would often just put plastic bags over the paint trays, and that way you would be able to reuse the paint trays again and again, and the contamination was actually coming from the plastic bag. So even though the surface was perfectly degreased and desiliconed and prepped perfectly, every time Aladino scraped the roller in that tray covered with the plastic bag, he would be applying more silicone to the surface. So it's really insidious and you can't see it. You don't know where it's coming from. Of course, silicone is not the only contaminant that can do this, but it is a really common one just because it's such a common sealant, which you can find on many boats. So I'm actually not sure if this was silicone here. I'm not sure what it was, but whatever it was super disappointing, and I really wanted to get rid of it. And I also wanted to make sure that this doesn't become a recurring problem in the shed, because once it's introduced, sometimes it can spread. I also cleaned the chart table with something called contractor's solvent, which is supposed to remove silicone as well as a lot of other impurities, so hopefully covering all bases there. And yeah, now we just hope, fingers crossed, that all the contamination is gone.
Meanwhile, I drilled holes in the transom. lots of boat yoga involved, and spoiler alert, this is not the kind of yoga that gets rid of your pain. In fact, it's often the cause of. Holes are drilled, and as nice as it would be to continue and put them in there for good, that's all we're gonna do right now. It is a really hot day, and it is starting to warm up in here. This shed gets the greenhouse effect, and doing big epoxy jobs when it is really warm stresses me out. So I really gotta start taping everything and then bond the piece of plywood that goes over here.
Okay, so I think I'm ready for the big moment. I have done what I can to make sure it is well prepared. So, time to break out the tabletop epoxy. I've been excited to use this ever since it arrived, and the moment has come. This is a self-leveling epoxy. It's designed specifically for this purpose. You can pour it on relatively thick, and it provides a really hard, scratch-resistant surface. I think having a hard layer over top of this wood is something I was especially interested in because the wood itself is really soft. It dents really easily, so after continued use as a galley countertop, I knew it was going to look pretty bad if I didn't have something protecting it. So hopefully this is going to do that for me. I also have my heat gun prepared because apparently you're supposed to stand next to the piece for at least 10 minutes after applying, and you pop any bubbles that appear by using the heat gun so that you hopefully have a perfect bubble-free surface.
Mostly fingers crossed for the contamination.
Yeah, well, I did hopefully remove it.
Well, that's why it's a curse. You understand now why I was so crazy about it on Magic Carpet 1.
I know.
Go for it.
I hope I mixed enough as well. Like I said, I didn't want to do too much. Oh shoot, that might not be enough. So unfortunately, I did not mix nearly enough this time. I've sort of gotten used to the quantities I need when I'm using the regular high-performance 2-to-1 epoxy from Total Boat. But this is really different. It's a really different application. It goes on way thicker, and I didn't really account for that properly. So I had to quickly mix another batch and hope that it doesn't start curing or anything before I'm done mixing. It shouldn't.
And you are doing an incredibly nice job.
So when I first poured the epoxy and as I was mixing the second batch, I noticed what I thought were spots of contamination appearing where the epoxy was pulling away. I became really dejected because I had already poured some on. I was mixing the other batch, so I was like, well, you know, there's nothing I can do at this point other than just pour on the rest of this and see what happens. But I really thought that this was going to go really badly. It was showing a few signs. I think this epoxy looks fabulous. It appears to be a really nice viscosity. I can see how it's self-leveling really excellently. So it's wonderful epoxy, and I'm just hoping that I don't have to completely waste this layer. On the other side, you know, I don't have that much love left to give, and I think that if this is not working, that might just be how it is. And we just have a table with a few irregularities. So I spread it all out and it was looking good, but time can only tell if that contamination is going to sort of cause those craters to appear as it sits there. But one part of the process which was really fun actually is standing there with the heat gun and popping the bubbles as they arise to the surface. It's amazing, like it just leaves this smooth glossy finish behind and it's so satisfying. So all we can do now is wait and see. So far so good, it's looking awesome, but yep. Time will tell. I was a little nervous.
Time to glue down the F deck. Oh my god. What a nightmare. Oof, I can't even touch. It's just really hard to access some of those places. There's quite a bit of squeeze out epoxy. And yeah, it's hard to get to cleaning up. Even boat yoga man cannot get to every corner. Yeah, a little frustrating. But on the good note, it's good to have some of the F deck on. Gonna have to give me a moment. I'm gonna have a shower now.
So it's been a few hours now. It's not yet dry. A bit of dust has settled in it, but overall it's looking actually really good. I'm really surprised. When we were applying it, I thought I was seeing all of those contamination sort of dry spots appearing, but they seem to have mostly managed to stay filled in. There are a few areas where the epoxy went away, but it was not nearly as much as I thought. I am so relieved that this epoxy pour turned out so well. I think it's actually going to be a real showstopper. I'm super impressed with this epoxy, how it leveled itself, and super easy to work with. There's no bubbles. It's awesome. I think part of the reason there's no bubbles and it leveled so well is because I did do a really good primer coat beforehand with the regular high performance epoxy. That I think really helped because it prevented the wood from soaking any more epoxy, and it prevented bubbles coming up from cracks or crevices or anything. I think if I hadn't done that, I don't know, maybe it would have still worked, I don't know, but I think it worked extra well because of that.
I wanna feel how you do when you're stoned. I've never been to the places you go. I take one hit and convince myself everyone's bored of me. You say it's all in your head, baby. Well, that's the problem.
It's like a mirror from here.
It does look like a mirror. I mean, it's crazy. It really turned out. So I'm gonna sand it down and then we start with the varnish layers. And speaking of the varnish layers, the drawer fronts that I have in the painting room at the moment, I've been just sort of slowly working on those over the past little while. Yesterday I applied the first coat of the satin finish varnish. I think they came out really nicely. I like that sort of soft glow as opposed to the harsh gloss. And yeah, the light in this room has never been great, but you still get the idea. I am amazed at how smooth and level this all turned out. It's incredible. Like I said, never worked with this epoxy before, but I've sure worked with a lot of the high performance epoxy, and that works really, really well, but it is for a different purpose. It does really, really well at laminating, at sealing wood. But you know, if you apply a bunch to a surface expecting sort of like this really smooth finish, of course it depends a bit on your application method, but I've never had it be this smooth. The self-leveling, it really did work. So that's really, really cool. So second layer of the cockpit is ready to go on like very soon, hey?
Very soon.
Today, tomorrow?
It won't all go on in one go, and there's always a lot of prep work.
Yes.
So I have to sand this all flush, especially at the seams. Some of them are a little proud.
Mm-hmm.
I'm lost in
This refit journey has been extraordinarily difficult for me. It has really tested my patience, my determination, my strength to keep going through a project that is really, I would say I'm not well suited for. It's really oil and water mixing. But seeing this end result start to appear, seeing this finishing work start to come together, it is certainly a morale booster, as not only does it foretell the future, but it's also inherently a bit more satisfying than just the endless sanding which I endured. I'm really happy to have come to this point in the refit. I'm happy to have not given up, because there were so many points that I wanted to give up. And I mean, at the end of this project, I think I'll have a lot of thoughts to share about the worthwhileness of doing a project like this, especially the worthwhileness, that's not a word I don't think, but you know what I mean, of doing a project like this with varying personalities. You know, Aladino's a different case than me, and there's, I think, a lot to be said for you know, the differences in human beings and what that means for the projects that maybe you should or could or, yeah, take on. But we're getting there. We really are getting there. It's going to be beautiful, and it's going to be such an incredible sense of relief when this is done. Just a beautiful sense of relief. So these countertops now have 2 coats of the high performance 2-to-1 epoxy on them. And of course, we've got the first varnish on our teak trim.
I love the varnish.
I'm really happy with this. So yeah, this is 4 coats again, and it's looking brilliant. I managed to get a really good coat on, and yesterday it was actually really warm. Today you can see it's quite a bit cooler. I think the warmth actually helped when doing a vertical surface like this, because it dried quite quickly.
It does, yeah.
And that actually helped prevent runs and drips on this vertical surface, so that was great. And I'd be curious, I'm not going to continue today because I have to edit a video, but I wonder how it would be in this cooler temperature. At multiple points throughout this refit, I have sworn against ever setting foot on any kind of boat work project ever again. But I do think that there's many things we could have done to make this process a little bit better. I think the time pressure imposed by the visa restriction was the biggest sort of downfall of this whole project for us. If I had a better sort of balance between this work and the things I enjoy doing, I think it would have been a really, really different project. And I have to say, I don't think I'll ever take on a refit with this amount of structural work again. If you would like to, Dini, be my guest, but I think I will decline being involved in that. But I'm not minding this aesthetic part of it. I think it's quite satisfying, and this is the part where the satisfaction really comes together. Anywho, thanks for being here. And thank you as always for leaving a comment, for liking the video, for subscribing to the channel. If you really enjoyed the video, we would love if you could join us over on Patreon. That is what keeps the channel alive and allows us to say no to big sponsorships, which is really great because I love the fact that we can be audience funded, and that's just really, really amazing. In exchange, we post real-time updates on Patreon every Tuesday or Wednesday with a walkthrough of the boat in its current condition, since these videos are always a bit delayed. Those walkthroughs are much more casual, informal. We're just chatting to you, talking about some of the dilemmas or conundrums or decisions that we're facing in the rebuild, and having a much more real-time conversation about ideas surrounding the boat rebuild. So, thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you next Friday. Extra big thanks to the folks whose names are now appearing on screen. Okay, bye.